So today we have actually very special Preglov colokvij because we have a special Preglov lecturer, a Nobel Prize winner for chemistry in 2017, Professor Joachim Frank. So, Professor Frank, we are really honored to have you here. And as I saw in your CV, actually you start with science as a young child to play with the experiments in your parents' house. So you see very enthusiastic scientists with really very rich career. And now I would like to invite our director of the National Institute of Chemistry, Professor Dr. Gregor Anderluch, to introduce his scientific career and scientific career of our guest.
Thank you very much, Natasha. My lectures usually have not such a high attendance. I just realized we need a bigger lecture. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming to this Preglov colloquium. As Natasha said, we are extremely proud and honored that we can host a Nobel Prize winner today at our institute. It's an important day. We are opening new facility, krio-EM facility, which is really a big addition to our institute. So just allow me briefly to introduce Professor Frank. Professor Frank is working at the Department of Biochemistry and Molecular Biophysics and at the Department of Biological Sciences at Columbia University. He received his PhD from the Technical University in Munich, and in 1975 he joined the Wadsworth Center in Albany as a senior research scientist. Then he moved to the Department of Biological Sciences of SUNY Albany in 1985, and in 2008 he moved to New York to assume his current positions. Dr. Frank's lab has developed techniques of single particle reconstruction of biological macromolecules, specializing in mathematical and computational approaches. This is all very well, of course, relevant to krio-EM. He has applied these techniques of visualization to explore the structure and dynamics of the ribosome during the process of protein synthesis. Dr. Frank is a distinguished scientist. He's a member of the National Academy of Sciences, of the American Academy of Microbiology. He's a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Some of his prizes: in 2014 he was honored with the Franklin Medal for Life Science. In 2017 he shared the Wiley Prize in Biomedical Sciences with Richard Henderson and Marion Van Til. And finally, he was awarded the 2017 Nobel Prize in Chemistry together with Jacques Dubouchier and Richard Henderson. Again, we are very proud to host you here, and Professor Frank, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the warm welcome, and I'm very gratified to be here, and I really like to congratulate you for the inauguration of the new krio-EM facility. I know what it means to sort of join the world now in this advanced technology. So my heartfelt congratulations. So I'd like to give you essentially, since everybody I think already knows about krio-EM, I will give you a bit of a historical background and bring you sort of stepwise to the present time. And some of this might not be known. But first of all, I have a few slides about the overall context. And the overall context is of course the question, what is life? And I selected this species of life form for a particular purpose because it is part of a task force in Manhattan for e-reading in summer 2019. So that 24 ghosts were led into a completely treated area, and they did an incredible job. And this was really one of the main attractions in Manhattan during this summer. But it's just an example of this incredible diversity of life. So what is life? In a nutshell, it's constituted by interactions of molecules in a cell, but in a very complex environment. And you get the idea of the complex environment by looking at a model of a cell. There are many compartments and many organelles, and there are many processes that take place constantly. And they all take place in the interactions of molecules. And much later, after I did my main work, the whole concept of molecular machines came out, and I jump a little bit ahead and talk about Bruce Albert's concept. He popularized the idea of molecular machines in 1998 in a sort of a path-breaking article in the Cell. And now we understand that the cell is not just a sack of molecules, but rather it is very highly organized, and the smallest form of organization are the molecular machines. Molecular machines, it's a very appropriate term because there is an analogy to the machines that we know in real life, in that there is actually a direction of time. There's a before and after, and that is created by the expenditure of energy. Because without expenditure of energy, there's no time in these dimensions. So there's a typically large molecule that engages processively with ligand molecules. So there's ligand molecule 1 engages and does its job and then leaves and so forth. So there's a whole sequence of events which is highly choreographed. And so we want to essentially understand these interactions, and we understand in order to understand them, we need to structure these molecules, and we need to know how these molecules change in the process. And one of the main concepts is really the concept of reductionism. In order to do this, in order to go to the atomic resolution and understand in atomistic detail how these interactions happen, we really need to take them out of the context of the cell, and then hope and pray that we get at least an approximation of the true story. You've seen from the presentation of Jürgen Klitzko how much is happening in a cell and how crowded the conditions are. So in order to get into optimistic detail, we do need to take the molecules out of the context. Now here's an example for a processive molecular machine, the ribosome. Now, for reasons that will become apparent in a few slides, the ribosome has become, my workhorse, the sort of the poster child of the entire technique. And there are particular reasons why it developed in this way. So, by the way, I was trained as a physicist and then became, by some kind of process of diffusion, I became a biologist. But a very strange biologist, because I only know the molecules that I've been studying in the whole process. So it's like a Schallplatten in German. Okay, so here is a molecular machine that goes through many different processes in different phases of its work, and it engages ligands like tRNA, mRNA, elongation factors, and so forth. here are other examples of molecular machines, and now they have already been explored by krio-EM, so they become recognizable. But they are involved in RNA polymerization, meaning reading the DNA and then polymerizing mRNA, which can then be sent into the cell in order to do translation, proteasome, ATP synthase, and so forth. So all these are molecular machines of very high complexity. We will not understand them in detail. Now I want to take a step back and sort of introduce the whole problem of studying these kinds of structures. And what immediately comes to mind is X-ray crystallography. Everybody knows X-ray crystallography, and I just want to go through the principles, which is that the crystal contains many copies of a molecule, and which are arranged in perfect regular order. And with exposure to X-ray, to the X-ray beam, we get a diffraction pattern, but that only contains intensity, so we have to go through a process called phasing. There are ingenious methods of phasing, but they have all been solved meanwhile. So we have now, this has been a long-standing technique for decades. The X-ray beam must be of high intensity, crystal must be almost perfect. And to date, and this gives you as a perspective into this entire field, to date there are 140,000 structures, all solved by X-ray crystallography in the public database. And they form the basis of what we call molecular medicine. Molecular medicine is informed by all these structures, and so it can, medicine can develop cures that are based on all this knowledge. So why do we need another technique? Well, there are a number of shortcomings, of course. And one of them is very serious, which is that the crystal packing introduces its own rules. It packs the molecule in such a way that the overall energy is minimized. And that leads to structures that are not necessarily lifelike. They don't reflect the structure that the molecule actually assumes. And in fact, it undergoes a series of structural changes. So all these are not necessarily seen when we solve the structure by X-ray crystallography. And then, of course, the most serious limitation is that we need to have crystals. If the molecules don't cooperate with us and don't form crystals, then we don't see them. There's nothing we can do. So there's a whole class, there's a large class of molecules that are important for medicine, but we don't know the structure. And sample quantity can be a problem because in order to do X-ray crystallography, you have to explore a whole series of conditions in a matrix form for inducing crystallization. And so we need multiple aliquots of the sample in order to do that. And so electron microscopy doesn't have this requirement. Right, so electron microscopy can be used to solve molecular structures as well. Projection images are typically in the range of 30,000 magnification. And to reconstruct an object, the object really needs to be presented from all different orientations. And now there are shortcomings, there are serious shortcomings. The sample must be very thin, as we heard from Jürgen's presentation. The electrons are readily absorbed by matter, and for the same reason, the electron microscope, the interior column is under high vacuum because electrons would otherwise get stuck within a few millimeters in the air. And the electrons also strongly damage the molecules, and there is a need for low dose. 10 to 20 electrons per angstrom square is a typical dose that still keeps the molecule intact. But with this kind of dose, the image becomes like salt and pepper. The details are no longer recognizable. It simply means that in order to recognize anything, to determine the structure, we really need to average. There's a need for averaging over a large number of molecules. And that really traditionally involved crystals again. Crystals, but this time these crystals have to be flat crystals, two-dimensional crystals, or helical arrangements. Okay, so I already told you images are very noisy, and then also I have to tell you now about this whole pioneering time when there was no cryo. There was only negative staining. Negative staining is a pretty bad way of showing molecules because the contrast is really generated by the stain. So we see the molecule only as a stain exclusion. We don't see really the interior. And this and the fact that the stain sort of leads to a collapse of the whole molecule. Nevertheless, that was the only game in town. That was the only way of looking at specimens. So there's now the pioneering contributions came at the MRC, and the very first ever 3D reconstruction using the computer were done by Klug and de Rozier in 1968. And so they used a theorem which came from Johannes Radon in 1917, obviously at a time when no computers were available. So this theorem simply said that there is a way of reconstructing an object if you have multiple projections. Each of these projections gives you a central section in a three-dimensional Fourier space. And so if you get projections from all different directions, then you can fill out three-dimensional Fourier space, reconstruct the three-dimensional Fourier transform, and then transform back, and then you get the object. In their case, they used, they applied this method to a bacteriophage tail. In this case, we have helical symmetry. In the case of the helix, a single projection already gives you all the other projections. So it's a very straightforward way of doing it. Now, but the important point here that I want to emphasize is that they used this theorem for a particular symmetry. So they developed programs and mathematics in order to deal with helical objects. And these programs could not deal with any other objects. Here's another example, also around the same time, Tony Crowther. Tony Crowther tackled the problem of getting the structure of a spherical virus. Again, he developed programs that were targeted for icosahedral symmetry, in which 60 units are in perfect order in space to form the capsid of the virus. So again, one specific set of programs for a particular geometry. Here we go on This time it's Richard Henderson, whose name you have heard multiple times now. And he, together with Nigel Unwin, developed the math, the programs, in order to get the structure of bacterial rhodopsin. And they found out that it's a 7 helix bundle, and for the first time got a reconstruction at 7 angstrom resolution of this helix bundle. So this was a big breakthrough, in part because they also overcame the problem of the poor sample preparation by negative staining. So they used glucose embedding, which was really a step closer to the real lifelike situation. So enter Walter Hoppe. You heard his name before, and so he essentially questioned the whole approach and said, why should we use crystals at all? Couldn't we just put the molecules, spread them out on the grid, and then do tomography, which the method that you talked about, and do tomography of this entire grid? Then we then get a 3-dimensional reconstruction of all the molecules that are on the grid together with the grid. And we can just pick and choose the 3D structures of the molecules. And so we have the solution. But the big problem is that we get a big build-up of radiation damage. And at the time, there were no solutions. Meanwhile, we have solutions for this, but at the time, we got an accumulation of more than 1,000 electrons per angstrom. Under these conditions, we get a 3D reconstruction, but it is completely meaningless because it shows the molecule as a bunch of cinder. You know, it's burned out. All right. So I give my mentor credit. Well, obviously for the intellectual environment in which I was, but also I give him credit for developing an unworkable idea, which I could challenge. Okay, so I developed my ideas in opposition to my mentor's idea. So my idea was, why crystals, and that's how I was led to the solution of 3D reconstruction of asymmetrical molecules, single particle techniques. And here's the concept. The single particle technique means that the structural information is collected from images of single molecules that exist in many copies. Now, obviously, if you do purification from a cell extract, you get millions, you get trillions of molecules, and they're all swimming freely in solution, and they're essentially multiple copies, many copies of the same thing. And what's wonderful here is that they are free to assume all possible orientation. So we don't have to tilt them, they tilt themselves. They are randomly oriented, and it simply means that a single snapshot may already give you hundreds of particle views. And we know this is not sufficient because of the need of averaging, the need to cover the entire angular space. So we just keep on collecting data until we have enough. Okay, now from my PhD thesis, I knew that EM images that were successively taken of the same object, but in different noisy realizations, could be aligned with very high precision by using cross-correlation function. So I knew it, and then the idea was, well, why couldn't that work with a tiny part of the image as well? This is, by the way, my thesis, which has not been published 49 years after completion. It only existed in 3 copies when I wrote it, and the Technical University was now made an effort to publish it as some kind of a jubileums Oscar or something. So it's incredibly flattering that something that I wrote 49 years ago might still have, command attention. So at that time, a little, later than my PhD thesis, I put all these ideas that I just presented to you in a paper in ultramicroscopy, and I made specific references to Unreal and Henderson because they had just produced this spectacular paper in Nature on the bacterial toxin, the 7 helix bundle. And so the tenor of this paper was, of my paper, was, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could do the same thing for a single particle? And so I worked on these ideas, but this paper really only essentially produced the concept of this. And together with Owen Sexton, I explored the conditions for alignment of two images of a molecule of a particular size. It was crucial to find out whether the method was going to work at all under the conditions of an experiment. And there had to be an inequality because you can immediately realize that if the molecule is too small, then the whole thing is not going to work because then you don't get very high precision of alignment. So there had to be some kind of inequality. And then we figured out, well, this inequality really had as important parameters the contrast of the medium that you embed in. Ideally, it would be ice, but the method didn't exist at the time. It's a function of the resolution that you're aiming for, and what's important is the critical dose. So it's a function of the critical dose, obviously. So we developed this equation, and that equation convinced us by putting in the correct parameters for such a thing as a ribosome. We convinced ourselves, yes, theoretically it will be possible to get to atomic resolution with a ribosome embedded in ice. Okay? So that was the outcome. And that really was the motivation force to plunge deeply into this subject matter. So I really got into the real work once I was at the Wadsworth Center in Albany, starting 1977. So then obviously I realized the devil is in the detail. I so far only been hand-waving, been talking about concepts, but how do we actually realize this? And then aligning images, well, I knew from my PhD thesis that it's going to be possible. Estimating resolution is some kind of a technical detail, but it is very important because you don't want to, when different groups work on it, they need to have some kind of a metric to say, I've gone so far, or I've gone so far, and with single molecules, you don't have diffraction patterns, so you don't know how far the diffraction data extend. So you have to make some kind of an replacement for this, and this happens to be by assessing the extent of the reproducible resolution in Fourier space, which I came up with at the time. And then we had have a way of sorting and classifying images, because so far there's only the assumption that they're all the same. But what if they're not the same? You have to find projection angles because they are unknown, because they have to be found after the fact. And then reconstructing in 3 dimensions, which there were programs available for dealing with all kinds of specific geometries, and they also dealt with regular arrangements of angles, but there was no 3D reconstruction programs that were available for completely rendered angles. So all these things need to be dealt with, and so this was now a crucial moment, because if you have essentially an entire program of what you need to solve, then the usual approach of a graduate student would be to build a program, and each time he has a new idea, make the program bigger, then bigger and bigger, and then there comes a point when it becomes completely unworkable. Okay? You cannot keep track of what you're doing. You don't have documentation and so forth. So there had to be a completely different approach, and that approach was a modular image processing system. Nowadays, many of these program systems have this kind of modular feature. At the time, there was nothing available like this. So the idea was simply to solve one problem at a time, and whatever is solved, put it away, and think of it as a building block. And then you have to have some kind of master program that picks and chooses the building blocks and puts them together using some kind of scripting language. And so that's what I put in place. It had more than 400 operations, and these operations were sort of primitives. They solved a problem like rotate an image, or copy it, or window it, or Fourier transform, cross-correlate it with another image, and so forth. Okay, so you had all these building blocks. The beauty of this is really that it sort of divides people into, there's some kind of IT people who are working on these building blocks, but then there are other people who use the existing building blocks and to build very complex workflows. And those, the second group of people, they don't need to really be mathematicians, they don't need to be computer people. They just have to be told what they can do with it. All right. So this whole proof of concept with alignment, aligning two-dimensional images. This was first published in 1981 in Science. It got criticism for a great paper in Science because it showed the reproducibility of these kinds of averages. There, by the way, the small subunits of HeLa ribosomes that you just saw in Jürgen's presentation. So here, there's sort of a seahorse kind of shape, and you can see the reproducibility of these averages. And that was also the first step into some really important grant funding at the time. But I already mentioned there is the problem of heterogeneity. How do we sort images? There was nothing available for this. And so we don't want to rely on picking and choosing and making subjective decisions. It's exemplified here with the L and R views, flip and flop versions of the small subunit. So the seahorse goes this way or that way. Negative staining always produces preferred orientations. And here are flip and flop views of a particular hemocyanin, just to exemplify the problem with heterogeneity. So this was solved. I was working with a student from Holland, Marie van Heel. So we solved this by multivariate statistical analysis. And this was, in fact, a real breakthrough, because that for the first time showed other researchers that the whole thing is going to be a serious technique, and because it could now we were able to sort molecules into the different species. Now the other problem was the finding of the orientations, and so we came up with this random conical tilt reconstruction idea, and this was in fact an overhead that I produced in 1979, just with the concept of the random conical idea. It was way before it was realized. For people from the younger generation, an overhead is this ingenious device where you put a transparency somewhere, and then there's a big lens, a huge lens, and a mirror, and then miraculously you see everything up there on the screen. So nowadays, it's much easier, but okay, so this was the idea laid out on in a scientific journal, which at the time had a very good illustration department, made a more understandable presentation out of it. The main idea here is that if you have molecules that are facing the grid in the same orientation, and the only difference is that the azimuth is different, then this electron micrograph doesn't give you any new information except molecules that simply in different orientation. You can put them together and average them, maybe get a cleaner image, but you don't get three-dimensional information. But the situation is completely different if you now tilt this entire arrangement into a higher angle, like 50 or 60 degrees. Then, all of a sudden, these projection angles are completely different. They are true three-dimensional projection angles. In the framework of the molecule, in the coordinate system of the molecule, it looks as if the electron microscope would move around in a conical way. Okay? And we call it random conical because these azimuthal angles are random. So that was really an idea that was then realized by one of my students, one of my postdocs, Michael Rademacher, who also came from the Hopper group and joined me later, and he had a lot of knowledge in 3D reconstruction. He worked out the necessary programs. And so this is really actually the first 3D reconstruction using the single particle technique. It was done in 1986, and it was represented as a stack of contours, very large contours, like this big, and they are here mounted in this wooden frame with the correct distances with each other, so that you can take the box, look from it at different size, and then you get an impression. This was the only way at the time to represent a 3D model. You could also, of course, take these contours and transfer them onto plastic or wood and make a wood stack out of it, balsa wood. That's very often used. And this was just the beginning of the time when these surface representation techniques came out. Here's surface representation series of that same reconstruction. So fast forward, when the Nobel Museum asked me 2 years ago to come up with something that they could display, they asked every Nobel laureate to bring something that in some way, in an idiosyncratic way, relates to the invention or the discovery. So I thought this would be the perfect object to bring. It's an 11-pound wooden box. And next to me by the way, is Jacques Dubochet, who presents the very first primitive plunge freezer. And here is Richard Henderson next to me, who presents an atomic model, which was not the one from 1975, but later from 1989. And that was partially why he joined in the Nobel, joined me as a Nobel laureate, because he was really the first one who got to atomic resolution with electron microscopy. But it was not the single particle technique. It was still with the two-dimensional crystal. So that brings us to the time when these ingenious frozen hydrated techniques were developed. Were actually developed in 1981. The precursor is Robert Glaser in 1976. But Glaser used liquid nitrogen as the cryogen. Jacques Dubochet came up with and Dowell came up with the idea of putting a little container of liquid ethane into liquid nitrogen. Now, what's the difference? Well, there's a very big difference, because if you plunge directly into liquid nitrogen, then between the EM grid and the cryogen, you have development of air bubbles. But the air bubbles don't conduct the heat very well. And because of this slow rate of heat conduction, it allows the ice, allows the water to form crystalline ice. We don't want crystalline ice, because the crystals have a larger volume, they crush the molecule, they also produce some kind of an underlying structure that interferes with the projection images. So it's bad. And so we're using liquid ethane. You can prevent this, and you get almost instantaneous heat transfer. And as a result, the water almost doesn't realize that it's being frozen. It simply stays in the same structure. And we call it vitreous ice. So it's a vitreous form. It's a glass-like form of water, which was really discovered at that particular time. So they were one of the groups that discovered water. Here are the plunge freezers. This is a hand-built one, $200. This one is $60,000. And so, you know, the difference is really that here you have more control over the environment. You have you can control the humidity and temperature. You can operate the blotters, the blotting under computer control. Here's another one from that time. Anyway, so what we see with ice is something like this when it's recorded on film. You see fairly weak contrast. It's very difficult to make anything out because of the salt and pepper effect. But that's what we were working with at the time. So we are really gratified that with krio-EM we still had enough contrast in order to apply the same technology as before. So we didn't need negative stain in order to get three-dimensional construction. So this was a wonderful time. We were enthusiastic about being able now to image molecules that had never been seen before because they could not be crystallized. And one of the prime examples was really the ribosome. Nobody had seen the ribosome in this kind of detail. There were only blobs before. Hemocyanin, there are many species of hemocyanin with different symmetries. and this is one that we collaborated with Jean Lamy. And then also the calcium release channel, and you can see it later in one of my slides at much higher resolution. So that was a really glorious time. Everybody was very happy. And I taught you about the ribosome. We were able to develop a model that really explained how the ribosome works, placing the tRNAs and the mRNAs according to what we learned from previous experiments that were not imaging experiments. I failed to tell you how important the ribosome was in this whole research. It had a big D, a big diameter, which meant that all the procedures for alignment and classification and so forth, they worked in a very robust way. And the ribosome also had high contrast because of the high phosphorus content, which is because ribosome, 2/3 of it is RNA. And it's very stable because of the same fact of the high RNA. So there are so many different ideal properties of the ribosome that lend themselves to the development of the technique. So I'm forever grateful to the ribosome for these kinds of features. But then, at the same time, it was exactly around that time when I realized, hey, maybe I'm a biologist after all. But then I still didn't learn biology, but rather I hired biochemists who were specialists in this area. So they were postdocs, they were highly trained, and they knew what they were doing. Otherwise, I would have delayed this whole development forever. So I was very fortunate with the people that I had because they knew exactly what needed to be done. And they got themselves training in this new field of krio-EM. And so from then on, the whole development went very fast. And so within a few years, we had the elongation cycle figured out. So all the different steps by essentially stalling the process at particular times so that we knew we got an accumulation of a particular product, and then that sort of overwhelmed the entire data collection. And a little later, we made this main discovery of ratchet-like motion. So with and without the EFG bound, the structure of the ribosome changed in a major way by a rotation of almost 10 degrees between the two subunits. And that led us to the discovery of how the mechanism of translocation works. So mRNA and the tRNAs have to be transported to the next coda. This is one of the big problems in the process of protein synthesis. So that spawned really a whole lot of additional research. Now, the maximum likelihood method of classification, it was a real major event because there was a realization that there is a way of extracting from the same sample, from the same images, completely different structures. So it really meant that when we have a molecular machine that we can run in vitro with all the different components, such as the ribosome, then we can really image the entire story all at the same time. We don't have to have separate experiments. We can extract them all at the same time. And I call this story in a sample, because I was very excited. There's a story there, and we can find it by doing all these reconstructions, and then we can connect them with each other using existing knowledge. And here's an example of story in a sample. All this was in the same sample, and it shows the ribosome in different stages, because the ribosome essentially is doing this kind of intersubunit rotation all the time under the bombardment of the solvent in the thermal equilibrium. So then there were many milestones along the way, and somewhere along the way, I should say, I cannot take credit for everything that is happening, because there's many groups that work on various problems. But here, I'm stopping right here, 2013, and why? Because this was the last reconstruction that we did with recording on film. We got stuck at 5.5 angstrom resolution. At this time, I still thought, well, not 2013, but a little bit earlier, I still thought we're going to be stuck forever here. We never get to atomic resolution with this technique. And that's what it was about the time when these terrific new detectors came out that led to the resolution revolution. All of a sudden, it was become clear that we were stuck at this 5.5 angstrom resolution because of the very poor performance of detectors, including film. Film was by far not the best detector. So these new detectors detect every single electron, and you can see for people who can read modulation transfer function, the EQEs, you can see that these are way better than in film at the Nyquist frequency. You can see it visually. You remember the picture that I showed you before of ribosome? Oh, this is what an image looks like. It is recorded with these cameras. Here's an example of a story in a sample. All these come out from the same specimen, and they give us an idea. In this case, give us an idea about the mechanism of GDP hydrolysis during translocation. We got 2.5 angstrom resolution in 2016, and it was incredible when I, for the first time, realized we see water molecules right there. Water molecules with krio-EM. I thought it was incredible. You see base pairing. You see all the different bases, magnesium ions. So, and just to give you an impression of the amount of detail that we have in such a map, I'm just spinning it around for you. And then also, it was mentioned before that resolution is really a local quantity. It's no longer a uniform resolution of the entire molecule. Typically now, we get the highest resolution in the interior and then poorer information at the periphery, as it should be, because there is more flexibility. So here the resolution in the interior goes all the way to 2.3 angstroms. And here I just show you other molecules. And there was the time when all of a sudden, you know, I was still the only one in Columbia who was doing krio-EM, and I had these instruments available. And then all of a sudden people came and, you know, can I do this, can I do that? So it became a lab where more than ribosome structures were solved. Here is an example of an AMPA receptor. And then this is a collaboration I'm particularly proud of, which is a collaboration on the calcium release channel that I showed you before. Much other resolution, it was like 40 angstrom resolution. Now we get 3.6 angstrom resolution for the open and closed channel. We can track how the activation and gating is working. This was a collaboration with Wayne Hendrickson and Andy Marks from the Medical Center in Columbia. And cystic fibrosis, this is the one at Rockefeller, and here we have also worked on the cystic fibrosis, on this important particular deletion mutant, which is implicated in the cystic fibrosis. So, in conclusion, a single particle krio-EM really means that we have come to a new era in structural biology. There's no need for crystals, and very small sample quantities are needed. Resolutions in the 3 to 4 angstrom range can now be routinely achieved, and the best resolution ever, I believe, is 1.6 angstroms so far. So we are really in the resolution range. This is well within range of drug target discovery. And then multiple structures are retrieved from the same sample, which means that we get close function. And molecules, that's very important, molecules are in close to native conditions. They are no longer in what I call strain brackets. They are really free to move in the way they're doing in the lifelike states. So solving structures of membrane proteins is much easier than with X-ray crystallography. In total, there's a huge expansion of structured database relevant for molecular medicine. And much of this is still in the next few years. And this year is just shows a graph up to 2016. And at this point, because I'm talking about this entire development, I thank students, and I cannot list them, but I can list collaborators, many collaborators. Part of them were collaborators in ribosome biochemistry, but they were also collaborators in the methods development. And then I also like to thank my wife, who's been patient with a German professor for 37 years. And this is my group on the top of the Black Building at Columbia University. Thanks.